Okay, so we've got enemy death and we're now ready to implement character death. So we're going to need to create a death montage for the character. Now we can go into our character folder and animations, and we can go ahead and create an animation montage here. So right click, go to animation and animation montage. And I'm going to select Bellica Skeleton and I'm going to call this death montage. Now here in Death Montage, I'm going to add a death animation. So here in the asset browser, I'm going to search for death, and Bellica has a Death A animation and a Death B animation. Death A is a pretty standard looking death animation, and Death B is a bit more dramatic. It looks like she's flying back from sort of a more intense blow. So in Death Montage, we're going to add Death A. And if in the future you wish to use both death animations or even more death animations, you can add more montage sections. Now let's go ahead and create a new slot for character death. So I'm going to click Add Slot and call this Character Death. And we'll set the default group slot name to Character Death. Go ahead and save that. Now here in this montage, we're going to set our preview base pose. So I'm going to search for idle 0 pose and use the idle 0 pose that exists in the Bellica/animations folder. So go ahead and select that. Now I'm going to add a variable to the character class here in shooter character. This will be a private variable and it's going to be a UAnimMontage. I'm going to go ahead and copy this code for the hit react montage and paste it down here. And instead of hit react montage, I'm going to call this death montage. Now for the comment, I'm going to say montage for character death. Now let's go into shootercharacter.cpp and look at take damage. Now here in take damage, if the health goes to 0, we currently don't do anything. We need a function to call here when the character dies. So let's go into shootercharacter.h and create a protected function called die. So here in the protected section, we're going to create a function called void die, and we'll go ahead and implement this here just under take damage, just so we can see what the die function contains. So we have die here, and we're going to call this right here in the if check to see if health minus damage amount is less than or equal to 0. And if so, set health to 0 and call die. Now here in the die function, we can go ahead and play the die animation. So let's get our anim instance. So UAnimInstance, anim instance equals get mesh, get anim instance, and if anim instance and death montage, then we can simply play the death montage. So anim instance, montage play, and we're going to pass in death montage. Now we're going to need a function to call at the end of the death montage so that we can disable movement for the character. So here in shootercharacter.h, just under die, we're going to create a finish death function. And this finish death function can be a U function blueprint callable, so we can call this from an anim notify in the death montage. Let's go ahead and create finish death. And for finish death, we're going to get mesh, set b pause anims to true. Now we also want to prevent movement, so we can disable input here. Now in order to disable input, we need a player controller. So we're going to make sure our player controller is valid by calling uGameplayStatics get player controller. Now this takes a world context object and an index. We're going to use this and 0. And we can go ahead and store this in an A player controller called PC. And we'll just check to see if PC is valid. And if so, we can call disable input. Now disable input takes a player controller. We're just going to pass in PC. So we have this finished death, and we're going to call this from an anim instance, and in our die function, we're playing a montage. So we need to make sure that we can play the montage. One of the things that's happening is if we go into enemy.cpp and take a look at do damage, we're calling apply damage. And then after we call apply damage and do damage to the character, then here in our weapon overlap function, we call stun character. Now let's take a look at stun character. And here in stun character, we get a random value and see if we can stun the character. And then we call stun. Now here in the shooter character class, if we go to stun, you'll see that we're playing an anim montage here. So if we're trying to play the death montage and then we suddenly just play this montage, then we'll no longer get our death. So here we need to check to see if we're dead before playing this hit react montage and setting our state to stunned. So we can simply place an if check here to see if health is less than or equal to 0.f. And if so, we can return out of this function. We don't need to stun. Okay, so we're back in the editor. I'm going to open up Shooter Character BP and go to the Details panel, search for the Death Montage, and set this to Death Montage and compile and save that. Now, we also need to go into our Shooter Anim BP, and all the way down at the bottom here, let's add another slot node. And for this slot node, we're going to select our Character Death slot. Go ahead and compile and save that. Now we can test this out, and to make things easy, let's go ahead and set the character's health to a small value, say 10, so that a single hit should kill the character. Okay, and finally, the last thing we need to do is go into our death montage. At the end of our death animation, we'll add a new notify. So let's add a notify, create a new notify, and call this finish character death. And in the blueprint, in the event graph, we're going to go down to the bottom here, type finish character death. And we're simply going to get our shooter character, check to see if it's valid. And if it is, then we can call our shooter character's finish death function. And that should result in pausing the anims and disabling input. All right, let's go ahead and test out character death. All right, there's the death animation, and she starts to get up and freezes right before she gets back up to the idle animation, and also the enemy is continuing to attack, so there's two issues we need to fix. Okay, so to fix this behavior of the character starting to get back up, let's go into our animations folder for Bellica. So we're going to go to Bellica, Characters, Heroes, Bellica, Animations, and let's search for this Death A animation here. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this animation, and we're going to call this Death Trimmed. And we can move Death Trimmed into the Character Animations folder. So I'm going to go ahead and move here and go into that folder and open Death Trimmed. Now I'm going to scroll through all the way to where Bellica's at the very end here. And I'm going to right click and remove frame 0 to 55. And I'm going to go to the first frame and remove frame 1 to 4. And now we have this single frame where Bellica's just laying here. So we have this death trimmed. I'm going to go to the death montage now and search for death trimmed and bring this in so that we have another montage at the end. Now I'm going to right click here and create a new montage section and call this end. And in montage sections, when we play the default, we'll go straight to the end. So let's see how this looks. Now she stays in that pose because she's going straight to the end animation. We're allowing this default section to transition into the end section. So that's when this is actually useful, when you want one animation section to transition straight into the other animation section. Now, the last thing we can test is to make sure that once we die, that we can't actually move around anymore. So I'm hitting the WASD keys and moving the mouse, and I'm actually not able to move around. So that is working perfectly. Okay, that is going to conclude this video. Now we still need to prevent the enemy from attacking us once we've died, and we're going to fix that in the next video. I'll see you then.